Hey everybody, I'm Danielle Carlson. I am a science teacher, just finished up my 10th year at Fenimore High School, also the author of Teaching Hacks, and I am going to talk to you today about assessment. I'm going to show you mostly my Google Classroom for my classes while we were virtual, so I don't have a slideshow or anything fancy, and also I'm on a computer that doesn't have a webcam, so here's what I look like, and you just get to listen to my voice and see my Google Classroom for the rest of the presentation. My school is one-to-one with Chromebooks, so most of what I do is Google based. I'm not as familiar with Schoology, so if you use that at your school, you'll probably have to kind of tap into other resources. But I found Google totally useful for assessing kids online, and using Google Forms is going to make your life so much easier if you have the ability to do that. So here's my email. Feel free to write that down and contact me if you need anything as we progress through this. If you have any questions or if something comes up during the school year, please do reach out and I'm more than willing to help. So I'm going to start by talking about one of my 4 classes. We'll kind of focus on each separately because I treated each class very differently based on the population of students that was in my classroom. So my first group is Anat and Phys. My classrooms are all archived, but thankfully I can still access everything. We're just going to have this little annoying message down at the bottom that says that it's archived. Okay, so what you're looking at is the classwork tab. And if you're not familiar with Google Classroom, the stream is where you can put messages, but I posted most of my stuff here for the kids to use in the classwork tab. So we're looking at the most recent. I'm going to scroll down as the assignments get older. But what I want to show you up here first is this assignment or this document that I called What to Do This Week. I created this for every class and starting at the bottom because that's the oldest stuff at the beginning of quarantine. This document helped kids organize what they needed to do each day and throughout the week, and kids loved it. The feedback that I got was that it was extremely useful to help keep them organized, and it also allowed them to see where they were going in the week, and usually I was a week or 2 ahead and had this planned. If it's your first year, you might not be able to plan 2 weeks ahead, but for my kids, this was useful because some of them are faster than others, and then we're able to keep working on other things. So what I want you to notice is I told the kids what they were working on, what they had to do to complete that item, how long it would take, and an estimate from, thinking about my fastest kids to my slowest kids, and then when the item was due. I had to break this into really, really digestible chunks, pun intended, because this is digestive system. When a kid is working from home, they need to have smaller chunks of information and more frequent assessment, and not all the assessment has to be graded, and I'll show you how I went about that as well. So I'm going to scroll down. Now, let me show you. Normally, my classroom is organized by unit, but that would have been really hard for kids to keep track of because there were so many things for the digestive system with it all being online that I just broke it up by week, and this made it easier for everyone. So I was lucky enough that the kids got their note packet ahead of time. If they didn't have the note packet, I probably would have asked them either to take notes on paper, to print this themselves, or they could fill it out maybe on the document, but thankfully my kiddos had this all printed and ready to go. Now, anatomy has students that are there because they want to be. They're taking this as an elective. They're generally better students, and so assessment for them was relatively easy, as it was for my AP Bio class. You'll see that it wasn't always as easy for some of my other classes. But if I was teaching this in the classroom, we would cover probably 2 pages of notes here at a time, and it would take about anywhere between 20 to 40 minutes, depending on how much information was packed into this space. This is the exact same note packet that I used in class in years past. I did not change a thing. All I changed was my slideshows and how I broke up the information for the kids working at home. So I looked at this as what smaller chunks can I make this? Like the mouth and pharynx and throat and esophagus were all super easy, where I paired that together. But then I had a slideshow and some videos that I found just on the stomach, and then just the small intestine, and then just the large intestine, and really broke it down into smaller pieces. And again, that's why some kids like to work faster, because they could handle a little bit more at a time. Whereas for others, with balancing all of the other classes in school, that's all they had time for. So here's the intro notes. Here's a crash course that I had them watch. I'll come back to that shortly. Here's the stomach notes. And then I gave them a quiz on Google Forms. Then they did small intestine, large intestine, another quiz. The quizzes were just like 5 questions long, just to make sure that they're paying attention, getting their work done, and moving. Here was a review of everything, and then a quiz on everything so far. So like this quiz here was just on the intro to the stomach. This quiz was just on small and large intestine. And then quiz number 3 covered everything from the beginning through the intestines, just to keep kids working on things and reviewing and learning. Then they worked on, so they have to draw like the digestive system from their book. They did a web quest. They took another set of notes, and then the quiz was just on those notes. And then the next week after that, so we had some school-wide support days to help our students who were super behind get caught up. They moved on to the next set of notes, did a worksheet to practice, because this was a particularly hard topic for students historically in the past, and then a quiz on everything so far, but only 5 questions long. So you can probably see my pattern. Then they did a lab, notes, quiz, review, test, and then we moved on to the next unit. So let's take a look at what this looks like in Google Classroom. Okay, so here is the note packet. Here is what my slideshow looked like once it loads. There we go. Just reminding the kids to not zombie through the notes, to look at pictures, actually watch the videos, that sort of thing. It's pretty straightforward what goes on the lines in their notes. At the end, I've got links to videos that I found. There was a digital book that was really good that I wanted them to take a look and read that, and then another video. In the next set of notes, I did a quick little Google form. There we go. Where they just had to create a sentence using these vocab words. And then I would go and read the Google form, give them a score out of basically a 5 or a 4. A 5 was a sentence that was great and made sense, and a 4 was a sentence that needed a little bit of work. I could provide feedback to the kids right away. After I read their sentence, I could see who is getting the information and who wasn't. It was really slick. The other thing, again, Google Forms is going to save your life. Most people know about using Google Forms for quizzes, but I also used it for worksheets. So here's an example of a quiz. I gave students the score that they earned. They could use their notes and worksheets, because if they're doing this at home, I can't stop them. And honestly, if you're assessing a student, you should be assessing their ability to synthesize things, right? Those higher level functions. So on this quiz, I did use more simple questions because it was just checking their understanding of the notes. But as you'll see when we get to the test, I started testing their higher order critical thinking skills. So here's what the quiz looked like. If there was a question that might be tricky, I gave feedback for incorrect answers to help kids understand why they might have had something wrong. This was an 8-point quiz. One thing that I really like about Google Forms is that you can see what the most common incorrect answer is. So kids here did really well, not too many issues. But like, let's say that this last one had 15 answers that were incorrect and, just 17 or whatever that were correct. Then I would say, ooh, there's something about this one answer where a lot of kids are getting it wrong that I need to spend more time going over. So quizzes, I would give the kids the score that they earned. I did worksheets in Google Classroom as well. Super helpful. Highly recommended that you go this route. It will take a lot of time on the back end getting it together, but in the end, it's going to be so worth it because Google Classroom allows you to import their scores directly without even having to open the Google form. And so if your kids are doing fine on something that you're grading for completion anyway, then you don't have to spend time going through and reading each answer. It just streamlines things. So this was a crash course that the kids had to watch. This corresponded to a worksheet that I had printed if I had class in person. But because my kids didn't have that, I just made it so it would grade it automatically for me. The kids would get the answers. And I didn't even have to do anything really for the most part. The kids just had to watch Crash Course, answer it, and then I got their scores and I could put those in the grade book. So that was our first week here. You can see where the quizzes are. Here's the second week. This worksheet. Okay, so some of the worksheets that I did, I graded them on completion because I didn't want kids to be afraid of making mistakes. If they're afraid of making mistakes, they're more likely to cheat because they want a good grade, whereas I want them to learn. So for this worksheet, part that is getting a little more higher level thinking, the kids had, let's see how many questions, because I don't even remember off the top of my head, 25 questions to answer. And if they got it wrong, when they submitted it, they got feedback about what they had wrong. So here, like, look at this one. There's 12 kids who answered that one question right here. 12 out of 34 were correct answers. These are hard when they're multiple response and they have to, like this one, there were the two answers and you had to have both right in order to get this question right. And so no matter what score the kids got, they would get their 25 out of 25, or how usually I would make it like 10 out of 10 points. And then when I imported the scores in Classroom, I could look and say, okay, so I've got a couple kids who have 23s, 24s, that's fine. Ooh, this student has a 10. Well, then I can go pull open their worksheet, see where they're struggling, reach out to them and ask if they need any personal help through Zoom or Hangouts. And it was really slick. They could get feedback before they took the quiz, which would help them to understand things even more and just check for complete understanding of everything. Lab, for assessing these labs, if you have to pull open 40 sheets in Google Classroom, it's going to take you forever and it's going to probably feel awful because it's very time consuming. So sometimes I only grade parts of worksheets or just completion, and I'll talk about that with environmental science. Sometimes as long as a kid turned it in, I would just give them the points for having it done. So on this worksheet, I made a couple of the questions that I really wanted to make sure kids understood colored. So that one, this one here, and then I checked their data, basically. And those were the only three things that I looked at. I didn't care, honestly, what they had in the other parts because it wasn't as important as the questions that were in the color. These were the ones that really tested their understanding and being able to connect the dots. So that's all I graded. And then I gave them completion for the rest. So if this was a 25-point assignment, really the most they could lose was 3 maybe points for having wrong answers, or if they skipped something, then they wouldn't get the credit for any answers that they left blank. And then lastly, second to last, I suppose, they had a test, which I also made in Google Classroom. So this can be tough because with tests, you know, you want to hold kids to higher integrity. Yeah, that's fine. Nobody's going to be clicking on it anyway. But they're still going to have access to their notes. They're still going to have access to Google. So you have to think about testing them at a little bit higher level, being able to synthesize information and whatnot. With the test, I had it only open from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. And I was posting for the week before and days before saying, remember to take the test. It's only open from 8 to 4, reminding them. And then at 4 o'clock, I clicked the button to stop accepting responses and shut it down. And inevitably, with both tests that they had, I had 1 or 2 students who didn't take it in the time. And I did tell them that they would be losing points for not taking it during that time if that was something that happened, because I had been warning them for a long, long time before the test opened. So anyway, of course, I was going to let the students take the test, but the idea was that I wanted them to learn a little bit of responsibility and communication. I had a student, the first one, who didn't take it, email me and just say, oh, I was in Minnesota with family and I didn't take the test because we were traveling. And so then I messaged him back and said, hey, this probably wasn't a surprise. You knew about the trip ahead of time, so you should have planned ahead, right? Or contacted me and we could have set an alternate up. And so really what I wanted the kids to learn was responsibility and communication if they didn't take it on time. So coming back to the test, Google Forms allows you to have a couple options. If you click settings, I restrict to 1 answer, and click quizzes. I make it a quiz. Locked mode means they can't go out of the browser when they're on their Chromebook. If they were doing this on their Chromebook and had their phone next to them, yeah, they could look up answers and I couldn't stop it. But it just gave it a little bit of a sense of more security. You can have, so with worksheets, I would allow the kids to get their answers, their feedback right away. But I didn't want them to be passing answers on to other students. So I said later after manual review. And then once I emailed back all of the answers, then kids could see what they had wrong and why. And of course, there are going to be kids who cheat, right? They're going to be potentially sharing answers or calling each other while working on it. And you just kind of can't stop that, unfortunately. You just got to do the best you can with what you have and trust that over time, they're going to get what they need, and in the long run, it'll all be okay. So I actually used my old test that I had and converted a lot of the questions over. I'll show you the second test that I made because it was a little bit different, but questions that are harder for kids are ones like these that have a lot of possible options, ones where you have to pick the exact 2 correct answers. So, that increases the challenge of the questions. This one was something that we didn't even talk about yet from what they learned earlier in the year and what they learned in the digestive system notes. They should have been able to figure this out from using their understanding. So this was a harder question for kids. In my second test, I had them do short answer questions, and you'll see that later. So this would be kind of a typical anatomy test if they had it in paper and pencil. It's just a bit shorter than what it would be. And then it was graded right away. And if you're just getting the hang of things, honestly, this is the route to go to save yourself time. And then I'll show you the urinary system test. And then I want to come back to one last form of assessment that I loved for that class. This urinary system test had short answer sections. And if you make questions short answer, like so, you have to physically go through and read each question and then mark if it's correct or not. You can change how many points they get out of that. And if you don't know how to set up Google Forms for this, there's tons of tutorials online. I know my presentation here is going to be a little bit on the long end, so I'm not going to spend time on that now, but so many YouTube videos out there and things that can help you figure that out. One thing I did find, so I thought I was being smart in asking, so how do these systems work together? And I had kids who would put this into Google and copy and paste the exact answer that came up, because there are similar things. I had kids who would talk about this, and we didn't really talk about the renal artery, or you could tell that the writing just wasn't theirs. So those kids got 0 points. And I had 2 kids who had the same answer. And my first thought was, they're cheating. but they both went on to Google and copied the same answer from Google. So if you're going to be writing short answer questions, you might want to Google your own questions to see if the answers are findable, and then adjust to make them a little bit tougher so kids have to think and actually answer on their own. The last thing I want to share, this project was my favorite way to assess the kids. It was so useful that I'm going to for sure do this if we go virtual in the fall. And I wouldn't even mind doing this project multiple times throughout the year because it turned out really cool. So I like having kids model things. A model doesn't always mean making a physical object, but in this case they did. And because this is anatomy, I did allow them to work with a partner if they wanted, and if they did, either when they made their video, they had to both be like alternating in the video, or if they were doing a Zoom call with me, then they both had to be in the Zoom chat with me. So I gave them this research sheet telling them you're going to pick a digestive system disease or disorder that impacts one organ. So like, let's say somebody picks cholelithiasis, which is gallstones. So they would research gallstones and the gallbladder. This was a whole bunch of terminology that they learned at the very beginning of the year in the first unit. So I was having them connect back to the first unit. Then they had to take that research to make a model of the normal organ and then show me how the diseased organ is different. And they were so creative in what they did, and it was fabulous. So the kids then would schedule Zoom with me. And I told them that, yeah, you can record a YouTube video, but if you're missing something, I'm not there to be able to ask you questions and help you get more points. So ultimately, you're more likely to get more points if you do a Zoom conference. And almost all of my kids did a Zoom conference. I used Calendly to schedule my Zooms. It allowed me to put a cap on how many Zooms I'd allow in a day. It generated automatic Zoom links. I paid $10 to use it for a month, and it was totally worth it. And here's my rubric. So the kids would talk about, they'd go through the research, and then they'd use their model either at the beginning or as they discussed their research or at the end. The conferences would take maybe 10 minutes, and this was in the same category as the tests. So think that if they're taking those Google Form tests and they're cheating and they're not doing, and they're doing great, and then they come to something like this where they really have to know their stuff and I can pick their brains, if they tank this, that's going to pull down their test category and put it more in a reasonable place. So anytime that you can talk to the kids and actually test their knowledge, yes, it's more time consuming, but yes, it's more effective as well. So this was totally worth it, and I would definitely do this again to assess kids in a more authentic way moving forwards. Next, I'll be talking about my STEM and environmental science classes. Those classes have more low-level students in the mix. Kids need 3 science courses to graduate, so environmental and STEM are quote-unquote easier classes, and I get a lot of kids in them. This also means that it was harder to make some kids do the work because they weren't always on top of things as much, but I followed the same sort of format. As in anatomy, I gave them this sheet to tell them what to do. I gave them the chance to request help with me by setting up a Zoom chat. And for this class and environmental science, the things that we covered were broken up even smaller, and they were, for some cases, drug out longer. This unit that I did with STEM was Alka-Seltzer rockets, and I drug that out for probably 5 weeks, whereas it would be 3 if it was in the actual classroom. So a couple different things that I did with STEM. STEM is a very hands-on class. It's group-based. This unit was broken up by weeks before, but as we finished the different weeks, I started putting them into these buckets here of the rockets, the wrap-up, and the final project. So some cool things that I did here with these kids that I wanted to point out, again, a little bit lower level students. This was just our introduction letter, and I can tell you that probably most kids didn't even read it because of how long it is and how it's not broken up. So a little bit later on, they had another letter from this theoretical company that they were working for, and this is what I did to break it up. They had to stop and answer 2 questions and then read, and even here I tried to help them with saying what should be on the box, not in it. And it matched with on up here. I said, list 3 things, and here's the 3 things. And some kids would still put the wrong stuff. So here was in 1 thing to list. I would get a list of like 4 things, but I knew that the kids were reading, and then I could help correct them if they were way off base, so the further parts of their project wouldn't be a disaster. And I really recommend, if you're having them read, to break things up to assess their understanding of the reading much better. Because this is a group-based class, actually, I'll come back to that in a second. This worksheet I did as a quick, short little, they watch the video, answer a couple questions. The next one, they had to get 100% on it. So I created a little video, 2 minutes or less, to help explain what to do, because even though I have the instructions on it, so many kids don't read the instructions. And this they had to get 100% on, meaning they fill it out, they hit submit. If they have something wrong, I highlight it, maybe give them a hint if they're really struggling, send it back to them, they fix it, they submit it, and we keep going back and forth until it's perfect. There are a couple kids who really struggle, maybe they're special education or ELLs, and you don't want them to get super frustrated, so there's a couple kids that after about the 3rd try, I would put the correct answer on there and make sure that they read it and understood it, and not make them keep submitting it, so they would, otherwise get super frustrated and potentially shut down. So this allowed me to make sure that they really understood what was going on before moving on. And then, because, here's where I was coming back to, because this was a group-based class, they had to use this Google spreadsheet, and they had to put their information on here. Now, this spreadsheet was shared between the whole class, so each student was assigned a variable. They had to test it, they had to fill in observations, and it worked out really cool. And I knew which kids were and were not going to be doing their work, so I made sure that I split up the hardworking kids versus the non-working kids, across the variables. It would have been really tough if I had all of the kids on this particular variable that never did work, because then when you're progressing through the further steps of the project, you'd be missing a whole set of information. But you can do collaborative work, and then you have less to assess. I could basically come on this sheet, see who has done, give them their completion points, and boom, be done in 5 minutes grading that information. For this sheet, graph and proposals, not all the kids picked it up, and I also wanted the kids to make this little graph by hand. So what I told the kids to do was take a picture of their assignment and then just upload it. So here's the student's work. I didn't even care what they put on the back as long as it was filled in. I cared more what their graph looked like, so I was able to assess that very quickly. And this was a great way to have kids turn work in. They had the Google Classroom app, they took pictures and just uploaded them, and it was really slick. So I would highly recommend that as well. And then, just like in the other classes, I tried to do something a little bit more hands-on-ish, a little more synthesizing at the end. So they had to tell me how they used STEM in their everyday life, and it turned out pretty cool to see what they did when they were all done. Environmental science, this one was this year. Okay, environmental science, very similar, broken up into very small sections. And this was a smaller class, so I actually would often read their answers. We did that in class before the shutdown, so I have to go back up here. Yeah, okay, so let's click here on current events. I'm gonna pop open a couple assignments. This one is a good one. Wisconsin and climate change was a good one too. Okay, so like current events, these are really quick for me to read, so I actually do read them for kids, but it's easier to find student answers if you use tables, like so. Sorry if you can hear my dog barking. She's out on the porch and likes to bark at everything. For this article, again, breaking it up into smaller pieces, insert a 1-cell text box in order to create a place for students to write. I could have broken this up into smaller pieces for students, especially with some of my low-level students, but this is one of the ones that really all I cared about mostly were these last answers. And then I would put this on the worksheets for that class. If you want me to pre-check your answers to make sure you get all the points, have me look at it. And I had at least 5 kids or so who would send me an email. If they had something wrong, I'd give them a little comment on it and say, hey, yep, this one needs to be fixed. And then they would get all their points and they would be learning it in the process. It was a really great way to assess. Here's one that I just graded on straight completion. If the assignment was turned in, I'd pop it open, I'd skim, make sure they had something typed everywhere, and give them points just for having it done. So some things you grade on accuracy, some things you just grade on completion, and then there's some fun things that you can do, like using Padlet. So I had my kids do Earth Day cleanup, and they had to just post a picture of themselves and what they cleaned up. And that was their assignment, and as long as they had that, they got their points. I had them do a summary project where they had to make a slideshow. If you want kids to do things right, make videos to explain it. Don't expect them to read what you have and understand it, because they probably won't. Like if I was reading this, my eyes would glaze over. So make videos, pretty simple, in order to help kids with that. And also with environmental, I did a fun little project where they had to do an art upcycling because it was environmental. So find trash at home, make me a cool animal out of it, gave them a week to get it done, created the Dropbox here, and then all they had to do was upload either videos or pictures of their animal and what they made. It was cool when they had a video because they would just explain it really briefly. I got some really cool projects. It was a lot of fun. Something really easy that you can do. Lastly, I'm going to talk about AP Biology. So AP Bio is a class that has really hardworking students in it, right? Because they have a test that they're working for. This class was more grading intensive at the end, but at the beginning, I was lucky enough that I was far enough in my curriculum where there was just a little bit left for the kids to do. And what we would do is they would take notes. We're gonna go up to here. Okay, so they would take the notes, check it with the answers. I posted the answer keys, and then they would send me the pictures of their information. I was at the beginning reading, like looking at each page, but you can see how long this takes to click through 6 pages. Thankfully, I only had 13 students, but if you have a class of 20, it's going to take forever. But I was reading to see if they wrote any questions on anything. Thankfully, most of them were good that if they had questions, they'd shoot me an email. Later, towards the end, when we were preparing for FRQs, there was a lot more work involved on my end in terms of grading because I had to give them very specific feedback, and it took forever to read every part and give very specific feedback on everything, but that's what the kids needed in order to prep for the test. So it's kind of, you have to decide, what's best for the kids versus what's best for you. The last thing I want to mention, I just remembered I didn't talk about this with anatomy. If you don't have the chance to get the kids a note packet, so we got to urinary system next, I didn't have anything printed. I gave kids a slideshow. They each got a copy of it like this, where their answer would go in the yellow boxes, and then I could go through and read and see very quickly where their answers were supposed to be. They correlated with the video that was off to the side. And most of the time, really all I came to read was their last question, or sometimes I'd even return it to them and put a note on it for every student saying, I skimmed your notes. If you want me to check for accuracy, just leave me a comment back and I will read your answers more thoroughly. And I did have a couple kids take advantage of that as well. So just kind of putting the ball in their court. So that's really all I have for you. That's what I did for assessment. There's lots of other things out there that you can use. I know Flipgrid is one that some people used, but like I said earlier, there's this balance you have to find between what is too time consuming for you and what assesses the kids in a solid, authentic way, and thinking about what your thoughts on assessment are. Do you believe that everything should be for accuracy? Is completion okay? I'm just kind of sorting that out and thinking about that before you have to actually jump in and start throwing all your stuff online. But when it comes down to it, short, digestible chunks, frequent assessment. If you can use Google Forms, I really highly recommend that to give feedback to kids and just really be in constant communication with the kids. Let them contact you on Zoom or Hangouts or set up appointments if they need help on things. But just stay in that constant conversation with them as much as you can, especially in your upper level classes if you have any, to see how kids are doing and understanding the content. If you have any questions, like I said, please do reach out to me. I do check my email over the summer, not necessarily every day, but I will see it at some point if you email me, or feel free to email me throughout the school year as well. Best of luck. Thanks for listening.